Hi, my name is Jessie Baxter, and I'm the creative producer and business manager here at Company One Theater. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
And I'm Kirsten, Greenidge, Mellon, and Howell playwright in residence at C1. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Welcome to The Great Demand, Confronting the 19th Amendment.
Before we get started, we would like to begin by acknowledging that Company One Theater produces work in Boston, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Wampanoag, Nipmuc, and Massachusetts people. It is important to understand and honor the history of the Indigenous land that we occupy and recognize that this acknowledgement is insufficient and does not undo the harm against Indigenous people. We continue to take small steps toward a more just future. Thank you.
We're here today to commemorate and interrogate an important date, the centennial anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which states that citizens cannot be denied the right to vote on the basis of sex. That milestone victory for our democracy granted 26 million American women suffrage. In other words, they became eligible to vote. But of course, the path to full electoral equality didn't end when the federal suffrage amendment became law on August 18, 1920. In the decades that followed, people from marginalized communities who were disenfranchised on the basis of both gender and race continued to fight for access to the ballot box. And for many people, that battle continues even today.
The passage of the 19th Amendment is only one page in the much longer story of voting rights in the United States, and it's our job now to grapple with that history and build upon the suffragists' legacy toward a more just and equitable democracy for all. Because Company One's mission is to create community at the intersection of art and social change, this anniversary is the perfect opportunity to bring some of our communities together to explore the issue of voting rights, especially in this very crucial election year.
This season, at Company One, we are thrilled to work with an amazing group of New England-based writers. We are super excited that several of our unit playwrights from this season and a few PlayLab alums have answered the call to examine suffrage, and those voices we'd like to lift up during 2020 as we celebrate the suffrage centennial.
So what will you see tonight? You will see very short plays written from prompts that were given to those playwrights Kirsten mentioned just a short time ago.
As in a week ago.
And as per usual with Company One, we'll be visited by special guests throughout the program from organizations that intersect with the themes woven through this particular set of plays. We'll check back in later to talk more about the process for our playwrights, but I think we should go ahead and get into it. What do you think?
Let's dive in. So without further ado, we give you The Great Demand.
Leona is in a function room, looking at 2 rows of 10 tables each, spread at least 10 feet apart from one another. She is on her phone.
Misogyn what? Oh, that doesn't sound right. Kiara, what are you talking about? Say it one more time, slowly. Misogynoir? Oh, okay, I got it that time. It's a term coined by Moya Bailey. Have I heard of Moya Bailey? Should I have? Key, slow down and speak louder. It's so hard to hear you guys over the crowd. Okay, I will look her up. More importantly, were people wearing masks? I know that you and Sabrina are 25. I did give birth to you, as I remember. I'm not making any accusations. I know that the two of you never leave home without your masks. I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about the other folks out there partying like it's 1999 instead of trying to survive a global pandemic. 2 pandemics. Yes, I know. I heard you in the background, Sabrina. You guys be careful. Please be careful. Okay. I love you too.
Humming to herself, she stops in the supply closet. She pulls out a projector and places it on a table in front of the wall where a plaque is located. She then returns to the supply closet and uses hand sanitizer to clean her hands before putting on gloves and a mask. Armed for service, she heads back out to check each table carefully to make sure everything is ready to go.
Okay. Plates, utensils, napkins.
She
Okay.
continues in this fashion from table to table. At table 12, she stops.
Okay. What happened here? Helen! There you are. Can you grab 2 more place settings for me, please? It looks like someone fell asleep at the wheel when they got to this here table. Thanks, Helen. Yes, just leave them there. I'll grab them in a minute. 6 feet apart. Yes, that's why I only asked for 4 volunteers. Mo said that there was 1 more on the way, but she was having some car trouble. Doing God's work. Yes, I agree. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 to 4. Praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Wow, God's work. That funeral was a sight, wasn't it? I can't remember anything like that. I was a little girl when Kennedy was killed. Yes, Congressman Lewis was something, wasn't he? Daniel really admired him. Daniel, he would have been really moved by the celebration, especially the way so many of the speakers kept bringing up the Voting Rights Act. Daniel was a great historian and a wonderful father to our girls. He put me to shame with what he knew about the multiple feminist movements. He never missed a beat talking about the women's suffrage movement and how it turned its back on the Black women suffragettes. Like, oh my goodness, what was her name again? Hi, sister. Welcome to the Sunday potluck.
Hello. Thanks for welcoming me.
Everyone is welcomed here in the house of the Lord.
Amen. Thank the Lord. To be welcomed anywhere as a Black woman is a rarity in this world.
You can say that again. Would you like to add your item to the potluck table?
Yes, I brought some shepherd's pie, one of my mama's favorites, right out of Mississippi. She was one of those Black women who taught me that we are rarely welcome to the table, but we must take our seats.
I couldn't imagine being in Mississippi right now with everything that's going on.
Not too much of a difference between what's happening here in Boston and what's happening in Mississippi right now.
You really feel that way?
Yes, ma'am. The only difference is in Mississippi, the racism, it's in your face. None of this institutional oppression.
You would think being in the North, we wouldn't deal with this nonsense in 2020. But look, we have Karens calling the cops on queer bird watchers in Central Park. I swear, white women really are letting us down.
White women been letting us down. Heck, they used to leave us hanging. Before there was Karen, there was Frances Willard.
I'm not familiar with Frances, but all the Karens and Susans need to repent. You mentioned hanging. I heard there were 6 Black people found hung after the George Floyd protest.
6? I counted 206 in 1 year alone. Has to be more than that.
Why wasn't that in the news? 206?
We only make the news if we write the news. We have to control our own narrative or they will do it for us and in their favor.
Amen to that. The Lord sees all.
And so do cell phones.
That is the only reason they are finally believing us about police brutality, you know?
iPhones never bear false witness, thank God. I recorded hate crimes against Black folks too.
Good. These recordings need to be seen all over the globe so the world can see what America is doing to us Black and brown folks.
Especially to Black and brown women.
100 years since we got the right to vote, and Black women's voices still aren't heard or counted.
Same way 53% of white women let you down and voted for Trump, even after you and thousands of other Black women marched with them in their pink pussycat hats, is the same way Susan and Francis in the suffrage movement did me. They didn't include us Black women then, and they don't include or protect us now.
Speaking of protection, I've been so busy talking with you, I forgot to lay out the hand sanitizer and mask. Would you like a new mask before folks arrive for the potluck?
Yes, I would.
These are surely some new times we live in with the pandemic and this virus.
Ecclesiastes says nothing new under the sun. This virus is no joke. The virus actually killed both my parents when I was 16.
I am sorry to hear that. This COVID-19 is really taking its toll on our community. We already lost 2 members.
This isn't the first time they allowed a pandemic called racism to almost wipe us out. And it won't be the last.
You sure do make some good points. There isn't much of a difference between then and now. Mississippi and Boston. History always repeats itself.
Indeed it does. Well, thank you so much for your hospitality this afternoon.
You aren't staying for the potluck?
No, my soul got all the feeding it needed from this conversation. I am full.
Well, at least let me pray with you.
I'm always for a prayer.
Church member walks in and sees Leona praying near the food.
I know I am at the right church when they have a picture of Ida B. Wells and they pray over the food when no one is looking.
Who is Ida B. Wells?
The Black woman who single-handedly recorded hundreds of Black lynchings and told the world. She even held the women's suffrage movement until that Francis and Susan started acting like Karens. Go read the plaque over there dedicated to her.
Projector begins to play a video of Ida B. Wells giving a speech about women's rights and race. End of play.
All right, hello everyone, welcome. We are kicking off our first conversation of the night with Beth Huang from Massachusetts Voter Table. Thanks for joining us, Beth.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. I know that there's a lot we want to get to, so I want to dive right in. But before we get to some of the slides you've got for us, I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about the mission of Massachusetts Voter Table.
Our mission at the Massachusetts Voter Table is to increase civic participation of communities of color, immigrants, working class and low-income people, and young people. We want to expand the electorate so that we have a more responsive and reflective democracy.
All right, so that sounds like a big task, but I think you're up for it. One of the things that we talked about in our previous conversation was an op-ed that you wrote that I think ties the themes of this event together perfectly. Do you want to go ahead and take it away and tell us a little bit about Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin?
Absolutely. We are so lucky to be in a place that has such rich history of accomplished abolitionists, of accomplished suffragettes, and more. I wanted to share the story of Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, who lived in the South End, actually not too far from Company One Theater, and she recruited Black soldiers to fight for the Union in the Civil War. She was an abolitionist, she was a suffragette, and she was excluded from a women's suffrage movement that ultimately won women's suffrage, but only for white women. And so, in the context of who is part of our democracy and who is excluded from our democracy, I wanted to start with this local story of Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, who is unknown to many of us who fight for a more racially equitable democracy today, but we really have some local heroes in our own backyards who we need to lift up as we celebrate these 100th anniversaries of suffrage, to consider who fought for suffrage, who fought for abolition, who was counted, and who has been left out. So I wanted to start with her story here today.
Yeah, I think that that story feels like one that's new to me, and I'm so interested that she lives so close to the C1 office. It's interesting to think about sort of walking the same streets as some of these people who fought for rights before us.
Absolutely, and 100 years later, unfortunately, we're still not on an equal playing field. I wanted to share a couple of statistics about where voters of color are and how we're represented in our democracy today. So we often look at something called citizen voting age population. That's a fancy term that describes everyone who's an eligible voter. So that's this blue line up here. Importantly, I wanted to point out that the eligible voting population does not include people under the age of 18. It doesn't include immigrants, which there are literally 1 million foreign-born individuals in Massachusetts, many of whom are naturalized citizens, but a large proportion of foreign-born people are not naturalized citizens in Massachusetts. So that this blue line does not include immigrants who have not gone through the naturalization process, which is most immigrants. And finally, it does not include people who are incarcerated with a felony conviction. People who are incarcerated in Massachusetts, not on a felony conviction, can still vote. And the day that someone gets out of a correctional facility is the day that they can begin to vote in our elections again. So the percentage of people of color who make up the total eligible voting population has grown pretty substantially even in the past 10 years, from just under 15% to almost 20%. That is pretty astonishing growth in just 10 years. However, voters of color still make up fewer than 15% of registered voters. That means that we have about a 200,000 person gap to fill. So we would need to register about 200,000 voters of color to make up the registration gap. And then in addition to registration, turnout of voters of color matters so much. And so we see this kind of Batman shape where voter turnout surges during presidential years, but drops really precipitously for many midterms. And so the good news is turnout of voters of color is going up, but we still have a pretty substantial gap to make up to make sure that voters of color are claiming all of our power, all of our potential power at the polls. And so that's why the elections, not only on November 3rd during the general election, but also on September 1st during the primary, are so vitally important.
And so right now, obviously there's, as your slide just says, COVID is making this an even more complicated conversation than it already is for a lot of communities who are disenfranchised. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how elections and the census can happen safely this year?
Absolutely. So we really need to make our voices heard. There is no justice in a recovery without the voices of impacted people being at the center. Here I wanted to show that so many of the quote unquote low response areas in the census, so these are the orange areas, are exactly the most impacted places by COVID-19. These are the COVID-19 hotspots. Municipalities with a higher than average COVID-19 rate have responded to the census at just 47.8%. So that means that fewer than half of people in the median COVID-19 hotspot have filled out their 2020 census, compared with 71% in municipalities that are not COVID-19 hotspots. And so we have a lot of work to do to make sure that the voices of people most impacted by COVID-19 are heard in this election this year, and then also are heard in the next 10 years when we fill out the census.
Yeah, those numbers are super striking when you put them on top of each other like that.
Mm-hmm. And so it's really time to make our voices count. It's not too late to fill out the 2020 census. And the 2020 elections are right around the corner. I believe we have, so because the deadline for filling out the census has been moved up by about a month, the new deadline to fill out the census is now September 30th, meaning that we have well under 2 months to get out the counts. About 65% of residents in Massachusetts have filled out the census, but in so many places, especially in gateway cities, especially in low-income immigrant communities of color, the 2020 census response rate lags the 2010 response rate by 10% or more. So we really need to do a lot of outreach in the next about month and a half to make sure that we have the foundation for equity in the next 10 years.
So what are some of the ways that we can do that? Oh, here we go.
Yep. And so in addition to filling out your census, voting during COVID-19 is absolutely critical to make sure that our voices are heard in our representative democracy. The safest option by far is voting by mail. All registered voters across Massachusetts received an official vote by mail application. Make sure you send in your application to request a ballot as soon as possible, and I'll show you more information on the next slide. Your two other options are to vote in person through early voting. This is the first time that we're going to have early voting in the primary election, and we'll have almost 2 weeks of early voting for the general election, including weekends for the first time. And then you can also vote in person on election day. I know that voting in person on election day has some sentimental value. I can't imagine being an 18-year-old right now and wanting to vote for the first time, and it is a little bit more exciting to go in person. We do ask that if you vote in person on election day, that you make a plan to vote during a time that is not the busiest time of day. And so even if you request a ballot to vote by mail, you still can vote in person on election day as long as you don't mail back your ballot. And so on this slide, I wanted to share a bit about how to vote by mail during COVID-19. It's 4 easy steps. Make sure that you're registered to vote or you've updated your voter registration at the most recent address where you live. Then you'll receive a ballot application sometime in the middle of last month. And then you need to send back your request to get a ballot by August 26th, but really try to do that as soon as possible. And then finally, make sure that you return your ballot by September 1st. So make sure you get it in the mail early because it needs to be received by September 1st, or you can drop off your ballot at one of the drop boxes or at your local elections office. And if you didn't receive a ballot application, you can always download a ballot application at mailmyballotma.com. You'll be directed to the Secretary of State's website about vote by mail, and you'll also find a set of frequently asked questions. We urge you to go there as early as possible so that you have enough time to return your ballot. And so here are some ways that if you have returned your ballot application already and you're waiting for your ballot, but you're feeling antsy and you want to do something else, we have a couple of things that you can do, including joining one of our phone banks or text banks. We run phone banks that are open to any volunteer, and we run a training ahead of time every Tuesday from 11 to 1 and every Wednesday and Thursday from 5 to 7. We will be running a text bank every Wednesday at 4 p.m. You can also volunteer for the Election Protection Program and spread the word about the Election Protection hotline 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And then finally, there are poll worker shortages. Since I don't know about you, Jessie, but every poll worker at my polling location seems to be a 70-year-old woman. So there are so many poll workers this fall who are part of an at-risk population. If you are comfortable taking more risk, you can work as a poll worker and be stipended for the day and serve a really essential function of our democracy. And then if you're interested in any of this, I would recommend going to a newly launched website, safeelectionsma.org, to find more information.
So much good stuff there. I love that even though we're all sort of stuck at home during this time of pandemic, there's still a lot of action that you can do from, isolation, really, that there's still collective action happening. It's just not out in the streets as much right now.
Definitely. And, there are ways to assess the risk and take risks that you feel comfortable with. But at the end of the day, there are safe options for filling out the census and voting this fall, and we encourage everyone to take advantage of filling out the census online or by phone and voting by mail to keep yourself safe and to keep your community safe.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Beth, and sharing all of this data and these resources with us. I know we'll link a bunch of this stuff in the chat and have some links in the description to the event as well so that people can find this after the event ends. But we so appreciate having you, and on to the next thing, but thanks for stopping by.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Settings. Active protest site in Fulton County, Georgia. Time today.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what America looks like.
This is what America looks like.
Show me what solidarity looks like.
This is what solidarity looks like.
Protests fade to silence.
Mom, how long are we going to stand here and protest?
As long as it takes. Come on, Maureen, let's do the chant one more time.
We've been shouting all day. Can't we take a break?
A break?
Yeah, grab something to eat. Find a clean bathroom.
I told you not to drink all that Gatorade.
It's almost 100 degrees and there's no shade. I was trying not to dehydrate.
I know that you're tired. Honey, but this is important, and you'll see.
I thought my game was important. Coach was finally going to let me start.
There will be other games, Maureen. There won't always be chances to protect the rights of Black and brown people to vote.
Isn't there a law that does that?
And here I thought they were actually teaching you something at that school. Yes, Maureen, there is a law. It's called the Voting Rights Act. Let me ask you something. Do you really think everyone abides by it? Allowing all citizens of age to vote, regardless of race, ethnicity?
They should, Mom. It's the law.
Girl, don't be so naive. Do you remember what happened a few years ago when I tried to vote?
Yeah, the wrong guy won.
This isn't the time for jokes, Maureen. I waited in line for 4 hours and still was unable to vote.
4 hours? What happened?
The voting polls had technical difficulties. They kept promising it would be fixed soon, but it never was. Had to plead with my boss not to write me up for being late.
Why didn't you go to another site?
And stand in line for another 4 hours? Girl, don't you get it? Things like that happen all the time, especially in Black areas and to Black people. It's our constitutional right to be able to have a voice on what happens in this country. But every time we try to exercise that right, there's a whole system out there designed to strip us of it.
Even if that's true, How is holding up a poster and chanting going to change anything?
Nancy, a white woman who is an election poll worker, interrupts their conversation.
Excuse me, ma'am, are you here to vote?
Why?
I need to ask you for a government photo ID.
I didn't need to show identification last year.
A new law was passed this year. All voters must show government ID.
But I don't have a photo ID.
Then you can't vote.
Mom, is she serious?
Do you know that voter ID laws are discriminatory? Do you know that? And most voters who are Black and brown don't have an ID.
I don't make the rules, I just work here. If you're that upset, write to your elected representative. Now, please show me your card. I have to get through this entire crowd.
And I have a right to vote. I'm an American citizen.
Great, show me a driver's license or passport and I'll get out of your way.
I don't have either.
Then you shouldn't be in this line. Please, don't be here when I return.
Mom, she can't do that. Can she?
Yeah, baby, she can. Just ask the 90,000 people that were barred from voting in Fulton County last year. Do you understand now, Maureen, why we need to be here chanting and holding up posters and not at your game?
Yeah, Mom. I think I do.
I knew you would, baby. Now, why don't you start us off this time?
Here goes. Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
End of play.
I'm joined now by Jay Coddle. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you so much for having me.
You wear a few different hats when it comes to art and advocacy, so I was wondering if you could briefly tell us a little bit about some of the work you do with Mass Vote and with Dunamis.
Sure. So at Mass Vote, I am the education specialist over there, and so I kind of deal specifically with our public ed and typically exploring how civic engagement coincides and connects with young people and getting them involved. And I'm also the founder and executive director of Dunamis, where we provide nurturing, training, support, education for emerging artists and arts managers of color. And in that role, we're on the steering committee of the Create the Vote initiative, which again is about exploring the intersection between civic engagement and the arts community.
And you work specifically with youth at Mass Vote. And so I want to tie in a little bit of the play that we just watched and the sort of themes of that piece into the conversation as well. We saw the young person that was in that piece sort of wasn't quite sure about the importance about participating in the political process and sort of the impact it can have. And I was wondering if you could talk about the ways that you get youth invested in voting and in advocacy, and the different ways that youth can be a part of that process, even if they aren't quite at voting age yet.
Sure. I want to take a second to kind of highlight one of my personal champions, Michelle Obama. And she launched a podcast recently and was having this conversation with President Obama. And they were talking about the fact that there is definitely a disillusionment when it comes to young people and engaging in the civic process. Right now, politics is more partisan and divided than it's ever been. There's a lot of rhetoric and there's not a lot of access to understanding how it works and seeing that it works for the benefit of the people. But what I really loved that they talk about was that government is not this thing that exists on its own. Government is literally people coming together to make decisions that affect a large group. We can't set standards for education on our own. We can't set standards for health on our own. It requires collective action, and that's what government represents. And so choosing to not engage with that allows the people who do choose to engage with that to kind of have all the power, all the voice, and all the say. And so in our work, we have the Young Civic Leaders. We work with the Vote 16 initiative, which is about lowering the voting age to make sure that these young people who still have to abide by these laws and function under these rules have a chance to participate in their democracy in a real way. And I was surprised initially at the pushback we got from young people and from some older folks about feeling like, you know, young people aren't ready, they haven't made their minds up, they're not like developed. And I say that if we feel like they aren't ready to vote or to be engaged, that's not their fault. It falls to us to prepare them for that. So a lot of the work is just about empowering them, teaching them how it all works, because it's very confusing, and making sure that they understand the value that their voice has.
Yeah, it seems like mentorship and sort of modeling of how to be engaged in that process is a really important aspect of that work, because, you know, it might seem sort of esoteric and vague from afar, but then once you're actually on the ground and you're part of the process, it feels a lot more active.
And households with young people who are civically engaged and vote, actually, they raise the civic engagement rate for the entire household. So they're the ones getting their moms and their grandparents and all of those folks out there. So every social movement, as we know, has been led by young people. And again, it raises these rates there. And so it's very important that we not dismiss the power that young people in particular have in this process and in the larger context of our world and like moving towards a more equitable society.
Yeah, absolutely. And then can you speak a little bit about how that level of activism can kind of maintain over time? I feel like a lot of people come out for the big presidential elections and then, you know, the tide sort of ebbs out and there's a little bit more space between these moments of kind of collective action. And how are we making sure that youth are kind of coming along in the between time as well?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, to your point, like, I think when it's a presidential election, while there are significantly more people who vote, still not enough, but that's another conversation. When it comes to local elections, it's something like 12%. Sometimes it's not even double digits that people are coming out. And so we've been really trying to, as to your point, make this whole process less esoteric by saying local elections are the closest like ring to you, and the things that happen locally affect your day-to-day life. It's obviously important to vote and be involved on the federal level, but like these are your streets that your counselor decides. These are like your schools. All of these things are important. And for us, it's like, well, let's really make it clear what your vote does. So if you do this, it means this. If you do this, it means this. And really trying to make clear that impact. But it is difficult. And again, I would say this is a thing where that's modeled behavior. They're watching people not be involved, and so they think that it's not important. I do think right now, this moment that we've had is going to be a lesson in sustained action, to your point. There are definitely loud moments that are necessary, but I would say that it has to be combined maybe with doing some inner work or having some difficult conversations. And like that's just as valid as going out and protesting. And so I think mixing up how you engage with these moments and not invalidating the importance of any of them. You need to vote, you need to do your census, maybe also go protest, maybe, you know, call your senator, but also have difficult conversations with yourself, your family, and your friends. All of that is important, but it kind of helps to sustain so you're not feeling like you have to be on 100 all the time.
Yeah, and it also makes being a participant in the process more accessible for folks who maybe aren't able to get out onto the street or, you know, are stuck at home behind a computer and I feel like there's something to do. You know, there's still work that can be done from home, definitely.
100%.
I want to transition a little bit to talk about how your work with Dunamis intersects with this conversation. So you're working with artists of color, and figuring out kind of the ways to empower them to engage in social justice as well. What do you see as the links between the kind of active political work that's going on and the work that artists are doing and their responsibilities to the conversation?
Sure. I would say it's two things. I attended Boston Arts Academy, and they refer to all of their students as artists, scholars, and citizens. And that piece on citizenship was really important because it was the question of what do we owe our communities? How do we connect with them? And how do we show up as our full selves, meaning also the artist parts of us as well. So there's that piece about the responsibility of the individual artist. But at Dunamis, as we said, we're about supporting and uplifting these people of color. And while it's so important to do that one-on-one with them and teach them and educate them and train them, we would be not really doing our job if we didn't think about the systems that affect them. It's hard to say you can thrive here if you can't afford to live here. It's hard to say you can make a career here if there's no model and there's no structural system to support that. And so really making sure that these systems work to create a Boston, a Massachusetts, a nation that can support these artists in thriving is really important. And so that's the intersection. We are a part of this world and as such have to engage with it. And we just have to do our part to make sure that people can thrive.
What are some ways that folks who are watching could maybe support those efforts or get involved in some of the work that you're doing with either of the organizations that you participate in?
So I'd say at Mass Vote, log on to our website. There's always information there about how to get involved, or if you want to volunteer, there's a form that you can fill out to do that as well. And for our arts folks, I would say visit Mass Creative and sign up for the Create the Vote Pledge. That's something that both individuals and organizations can pledge, and it just says that they're planning on showing up in these elections and finding ways to get everybody that's connected to them out to do their census, to take their votes, to call their senators, and to really just make sure that we are all collectively, literally being the change we want to see in the world.
Awesome. Well, that feels like a great place to end it. Thank you so much for joining us, Jay. It's been great to hear a little bit about your work. And we will see you on the social media streets to make some action happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jay.
Setting: a water cooler conversation in the year 2320. Dolores and Sycamore 76, both humans, are in the evaporator plaza behind their office, meticulously scraping beads of condensation off a water evaporator and into pristine little water containers.
Have you decided yet?
Grasshopper salad from that place around the corner?
Not lunch. How you're voting, Dolores?
I don't know. Probably yes.
Yes.
Probably. I think that they deserve, equal access, opportunity.
We've given them that.
Have we?
Mostly. You missed a spot.
Thanks. Shouldn't everyone have a say, Sycamore 76, a vote? Otherwise, other people make decisions for you.
We've always made their decisions for them. That's how it is.
Except when they make their own decisions.
Well, originally, we made their decisions, so it's not really their decisions. They couldn't make decisions without us.
But now they do.
You know what I mean, Dolores. We made them that way. We gave them consciousness.
We did. Now voting is the final piece, a way forward. We owe them that, don't we? You also want the grasshopper with the silkworms on top?
Tell me you're not going to vote yes.
I like the grasshopper and silkworm layers, the texture contrast.
Even if I agree that they have a consciousness of a sort, the AIBs are not...
Babies.
Spiff that.
They want us to call them labies, you know that. AIB makes them sound like...
They're machines. They're artificial intelligence beings. They should own it. AIBs... Be it. Own it.
What's your lady called?
It's XK41. But now she won't answer to anything but Rosa. Rosa! They take our names, but they don't deserve them. It's against the natural order. And look at us. Harvesting water. They should be doing it.
I don't mind taking a shift. It's only an hour a week.
Work for the water, waste not the water. Propaganda. That's their job. Why we made them. We're trained scanners. It's a waste of our skills doing this.
Look, our hour's almost up and mine's almost full. How's yours, Sycamore?
76. Sycamore 76. The American Revolution was in 1876. I studied history. It's when we took our freedom. That's why I'm Sycamore 76 now. You should change your name. How about Tadpole 1492?
No. I'm named after my great-great-great-great-grandmother, Dolores Huerta. She was a fighter. In my family, in every generation, there's a Dolores. I am the Dolores of my generation.
That's all fine and good for you, but we shouldn't let them choose their names. Take our names.
Why not?
Because, Dolores, we shouldn't allow them. It's a slippery slope. Next, they'll be thinking, we love having fancy human names like we're real. Oh, now we have the vote too? Super. Ooh, what else can we do? No way. I was telling my XK41 the other day when she was strip cleaning the well, I told her, aren't you worried that trying to be more like us will make you more like us? Humans are soft and squishy. We're irrational. Lean into your strengths, I told her. Stay in your lane.
You told her that?
She was way down the well by then. And I don't think she could hear me. The mud, it's sound absorbing.
I bet she heard you.
Don't you ever worry that if they break through the gates we designed, they could overtake us?
I don't know. But they have consciousness, which we gave them. Now we have to deal with them on an equal plane.
But give them the vote? I can't see it. A lady being equal to me?
But Janice is a lady.
Janice may be my boss, but I'm a real person. In the big picture, I'm up here and she's down there.
In the office, she's up here and you're down there.
Whatever.
I like Janice. She's reasonable. 79.
76? 76?
She listens to me. She doesn't bully me. You should listen.
So you'll vote yes?
Yes!
Traitor. I bet your ancestor was a traitor too.
Dolores Huerta was a hero.
Never heard of her. And I studied history.
She was a voice for the powerless, like I am. It shouldn't even be our place to give them the vote. But I'm going to make sure that they get it. I am the Dolores of my generation. You missed a spot.
End of play.
Thank you, Amy, and sorry, I feel so energized by that rallying cry. Jessie, are you energized?
I'm so energized. And of course, I'm also excited about this process, which we'd like to tell you a little bit more about. Kirsten, can you talk about PlayLab a bit more?
Absolutely. So each year, Company One selects a group of playwrights to participate in our unit writing group, starting in January and lasting through summer. In past years, some unit members have also continued on with us as PlayLab fellows, developing their plays and seeing their ideas realized in workshop form. So this event was a great way to bring some of our current and past PlayLab participants together to collaborate.
We gave each of the writers you're watching tonight a prompt, which included some images and materials related to voting rights and the suffrage movement, as well as a place to serve as the setting of their piece. So work, church, home, and so on. And from there, the task was to create a 5-page play exploring the ways suffrage intersects with those prompts.
And what some of the writers got excited about was creating for a deadline for an event in this time when so many venues aren't available. So being able to raise their voices in this way has been really important for many reasons, and so important that we want to make sure we get back to it.
Absolutely. Let's jump right back in with my conversation with Emily Rudduck from Mass Creative, who is the perfect person to chat with us about how arts and the creative community can mobilize for social change. I'd like to welcome Emily Rudduck, the Executive Director of Mass Creative. Emily, you've been a PlayLab Bootcamp guest speaker before, so it's great to have you back in this digital format to talk about your work, since this event is all about the intersection of art and advocacy, and that's exactly what you do at Mass Creative.
Mass Creative was founded in 2013, and it is really focused around ensuring that the arts and cultural community has the information, the knowledge and know-how, and the platform to advocate for the things that we need to be a strong sector so that we can serve our communities and our neighborhoods. Arts and culture is not exclusively about an economic argument for the Commonwealth, but it's one where we do actually have some really great data points, which I'll share now, around what it means, why arts and culture count to Massachusetts. So nationally, we know that there is some really great data that tells us about the role that arts and culture play in making our economy strong and being an employer, right? And that is across all arts and cultural production categories. And that's a pretty wide net. So that's publishing, motion pictures, cultural institutions, architecture and design, arts education spaces. And then in Massachusetts, that holds true too. So we're talking about cultural production accounts for 25 billion in total value added to the Commonwealth's economy. We also know that it employs 63 individuals monthly. So every month, 63,000 individuals are employed through arts and culture, and that totals about 2.5 billion in compensation, and that was for 2018. And then specifically, if we're talking about nonprofit arts and cultural spaces, organizations, and activities, that also has significant impact. Again, that's a $2.8 billion in total impact. And then one of the things that I also like to point out is that we don't work in a vacuum, right? We, in fact, I think we are the heart of the gathering economy. So when someone goes to see a play or attend a dance performance or a concert, they are spending money in other sectors that the arts and culture is the reason that spending is happening. So that's going to restaurants, that's shopping in retail spaces, that's parking your car or going to a hotel. But that happens, and that's part of the economic impact. Again, we have more data like this on our website, and we'll send, we can share some links about that as well.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll make sure that we link in the chat some of the fact sheet info, because there's a lot of good stuff there. I'm really struck about those numbers being from 2018 and how different they're going to look for 2020 because of how COVID has shifted just literally everything. But that ability to gather, is totally different now.
Jessie, that's really true. And I just want to, that's been obviously the focus of the primary advocacy we've been doing since March. And those numbers will be different, and we expect they'll be different for a little bit. But, the thing that we often talk about is we're not the only sector that has had to close. Yeah. And we are not the only sector that's going to reopen. And if Massachusetts is looking to recover its entire economic sort of health, then we need to pay attention to our sector so that the dependable and reliable economic returns that arts and culture delivers to communities, as from North Adams to in the Berkshires to Hyannis on the Cape, and we know certainly in Boston, are able to do that when the time is possible for us to reopen. And so that's been sort of the lead in terms of our advocacy, is to say, we're an important part of the economic engine of Massachusetts. And if you want that engine to be working on a full cylinders, then you have to protect us now.
Yeah, that feels like a great segue to my next question about sort of why is it important for artists to get involved in policy that isn't necessarily just about the arts? Because I think there's a lot of conversation around like arts funding, and people will kind of like come and show up for those conversations. But then when it comes to things like policing or education and these other areas that are about kind of shaping the kind of communities that we want to live in, it's just as important for artists to be part of those conversations too.
I really agree with you, Jessie. I think that the reality is that when we're talking about arts and culture, there's this interesting thing, right? Like sometimes it's hard to pull out the facts of impact because our work is by nature so interdisciplinary. We are touching people's lives. We are shaping the way that, as I said earlier, young leaders think about being empathetic and sharing and supporting and caring for their communities. We are breaking people out of isolation in even right now when we're all required to be socially distanced. The arts bring people together through virtual programming like this. And so our work is not, we aren't able to sort of pull out just the one thing that arts and culture does. And so similarly, the issues that we need to care about and think about aren't just so easily sort of sectioned out. So, you know, I think that housing is an arts and culture issue, right? And that's everything from artists and creative workers live in houses or live in domiciles and are in danger, right, with the loss of the federal unemployment assistance compensation that went away last week from the federal government, are in real trouble around evictions and foreclosures of their living spaces. And so from a place of like personal need, we need to stand up and join our colleagues and our partners in housing advocacy to make sure that happens. But then there's also this piece, right? Like artists don't do their work in isolation, right? We do our work, we create our work to share our vision of the world and with our communities. And we want to care for our communities and making sure that our communities are healthy and safe and protected, that we are not doing harm, and that we are standing up to take care of each other's livelihoods and lives is part of our work, and is that care work. And we are not frontline workers. We are not, you know, in some way, we're not essential health workers, but we do have a role to play in advocating and making sure that our communities are taken care of. So that's absolutely why our work and our advocacy has to extend well beyond simply are the arts getting enough money from our state and local governments, but to think about how are we ensuring that people are being taken care of.
Absolutely. That feels like a great time to talk about the Create the Vote initiative, which I think sort of does all of what you're talking about and lets people kind of get involved even in this kind of digital space. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that campaign has evolved and how people can join on?
I would love to. Thank you, Jessie. Thanks for that opportunity. So since 2013, Mass Creative has done a Create the Vote campaign. And it's interesting because the hows and the whys has really changed over time. So I'm going to share a quick little slide. A lot has changed in terms of the need to really help people see their way to voting, right? So because of COVID-19, there's a lot of concern about voting in person. There's also a lot of concern about voting by mail. There's a lot of bad information out there. And because arts and cultural organizations and folks who identify as creative workers and artists have broad, strong networks of people that trust them to tell the truth and to be to help them navigate decision making, we saw this as an opportunity for our sector to really help make sure that people had the correct information, make sure that they had made plans for how to mail in their vote by mail ballot application, that they were up to date on all of the safe elections legislation that had been passed to help people continue to be able to feel confident about voting during COVID-19. And then the other piece of this is that we're also in a census year, and the census, which is a 10-year, every 10-year project to make sure that we are accurately counting our populations across the nation, is something that is also part of playing our part for democracy. Because when those census numbers come in, they impact funding levels, right, in terms of federal appropriations for everything from funds that are coming from the housing and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, right, through education funds, through how our legislative districts are carved up, right? And so for an example, the last time we did the census, we didn't have a full count, and we actually lost a seat in Congress. So there's one less voice from Massachusetts for the last 10 years because of the census. And so the census and voting have absolute real implications. And so we feel really strongly that the arts and cultural community needs to show up and take care of these things that ultimately affect how the communities and the people that we care about receive services, are supported and cared for.
Let's just wrap up by talking about how folks who are watching can kind of help join that campaign and get the word out as either individual artists or folks who maybe work within an organization.
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing you can do is you can go to our website and pledge to create the vote. And once you pledge to create the vote, you will be signed up to get bi-weekly communications from us that give you tools and information and sometimes graphics and social media items to share with your networks and your communities. And what we've tried to do is think about how can organizations use this as well as individuals. So that's the first thing you can do. And then you can continue to ensure, I think, actually, I was in a conversation with a colleague of yours at Company One and thinking about how our communications platforms are an absolute resource that we can dedicate to this work of advocacy for and by our sector and our community, for our communities and our neighborhoods. And that is a rich place where we can get the word out and we can make sure that our audiences and our patrons and our networks have the correct information and are able to participate in democracy.
Well, sounds like good stuff. I hope everybody watching goes and takes the pledge. I know Company One is taking the pledge as an organization. We're excited to get involved and help spread the word.
November 2nd, 2019. Jay, Inez, and Bridget are hanging out in their dorm common area, creating posters. Jay holds up their poster. It says, "The future is non-binary."
How about this one?
I like it.
My shout out to folk singer Alex Dobkin, who wore the original "The Future is Female" t-shirt in 1975.
You mean Hillary didn't make that up? We should use that story for the campaign.
Or I could simply focus on the pertinent issues the school has, like not enough financial aid, needing more faculty who look like us.
I wasn't implying that you should ignore your core platform, but as your campaign manager...
It is a good story, babe. I think Bridge is right.
Thank you.
Have you considered a logo?
I'm running for SGA president, not against he who must not be named.
But you still need a brand.
We're talking like I'll even win.
Why wouldn't you?
It's all about the votes. And I've already heard people whispering about me, especially after my statement about our gender studies program.
I'll kick their ass.
You know she will.
Let's see what you came up with.
You know I'm not creative.
Inez holds up a blank poster.
You're creative where it counts.
Well, you two got a room?
Okay, campaign manager, what have you got?
Bridget shows up her poster. It says sex, guides, and alcohol.
What?
Oh, freshman year, Bridge thought that's what SGA stood for.
You're kidding.
I mean, this is a woman's college. It's what we all want. Sorry, Jay. I didn't mean to.
It's okay. It's a process.
And that's all the more reason why you need to be student government pres. Time to stop calling this a women's college. It might have been 100 years ago, but things have changed. And you, my love, are going to win this election.
Interlude. President Trump has just been impeached on both Article 1, abuse of power, and on Article 2, obstruction of Congress.
People have to understand the pandemic is not gone. The virus is still with us, even in Massachusetts.
Protesters took to the streets to demand justice for George Floyd, the unarmed, handcuffed black man who pleaded with a police officer to let him breathe as the officer pinned him to the pavement with a knee to his neck.
It ain't just George Floyd, it's multiple black men, black women, black children.
Joe Biden has chosen Kamala Harris as his running mate.
Act 2, November 2nd, 2020. Jay and Inez are on a Zoom call. Jay's background is a dorm room. Inez's is in a hotel room.
How's life at hotel isolation?
I can't believe it's only been 3 days. Not sure I'm gonna make it for 11 more without totally losing it.
Still no symptoms?
Yeah, thank God. Unless acute boredom is on the list.
I'm so sorry, babe.
Inez holds up a homemade "Settle for Biden" poster.
I've been thinking all day about what we were doing exactly a year ago. Making posters for your landslide victory.
And now we're on some totally different, an apocalyptic planet with no idea what the future is.
That's beyond depressing. I thought you were going to cheer me up.
Sorry, it's just, you know. You need anything?
Yeah, actually. Now that I can't go out, I need you to vote tomorrow. Be my proxy.
Yeah, I mean, Inez, we already talked about this about 1,000,000 times.
I know, but
But what? Why can't you respect my decision?
I do. The whole system is so corrupt that participating in it is just perpetuating the original exploitative, racist lies this country was founded on. We don't need sham elections. We need a revolution.
So you were paying attention.
Of course I was. And I can't wait to get back into your creaky little dorm room bed so you can radicalize me further. But tomorrow, will you please go? You have to wear a mask. No one will even know it's you.
You still think your one vote counts for anything?
Yes. Women were tortured and died so we could vote.
You're forgetting they weren't dying for us to vote. Exactly 100 years later, and nothing has changed. I'm not going to get myself killed for some hollow promise by waiting in line with a bunch of science-denying MAGA chuds to vote for one of 2 sexual assaulter old white dudes. I'm worth more than that.
I didn't mean to...
Hold on. Bridget's been blowing my phone up, texting me every 2 seconds. I'm gonna invite her on, okay?
Hey.
Bridge, what's up?
Haven't you heard? Hi, Inez. You okay?
Yeah, fine.
Heard what?
45 canceled the election.
What?
Can he do that?
We're heading to the local precincts right now, and we need our SGA president at the front of the line defending our right to vote.
It's almost midnight.
Yeah, we have to go and occupy before the police set up. So meet me in the parking lot in 5. Bye.
Fuck.
Jay?
Fuck.
Jay, what are you going to do?
End of play.
We're so glad to have Ayanna Polk here to talk about the Mayor's Office of Women Advancement and how they're marking the anniversary of the 19th Amendment this year. Welcome, Ayanna.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'd love to have you start by just talking briefly about what your office does in Boston.
So the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement was started by Mayor Walsh in 2014. And the mission of our office is to ensure the economic equity, safety, and representation of Boston's women. So with a lot of the things that we do, I know that usually when you think about those 3 things, it's like, how can you cover all of that? So for us, we try to focus on childcare access and equity in the childcare field. For entrepreneurs, we have an entrepreneur fund specifically for folks who are in the childcare industry, because we know of the many, wage disparities in that industry, because most of them are usually women, and immigrants and women of color. So we want to make sure that we're uplifting and creating equity in those spaces. We also do a lot of work around human trafficking and sexual exploitation and the sex trade to make sure that folks are well informed on how to promote safety in that way. And we also do a lot of work around salary negotiation. We work with AAUW to make sure that we are teaching people in Boston on how to advocate for pay in order to help us close gender pay gaps. So those are just some of the few things that we do over at Women's Advancement. It's never a dull day, but I know for this month, with it being the suffrage centennial, we're very excited to commemorate this milestone.
Yeah, and so I know when we spoke earlier, you talked about, you had all these plans, and then the pandemic happened, and we've had to sort of shelve a lot of the things that were initially on the table in terms of celebrating this moment. So can you talk a little bit about how you're marking that milestone in this current moment, and why it's important to acknowledge this centennial, this anniversary at the city level?
Yes, well, when you look at the history of the journey to the 19th Amendment, a lot of things happened here in Boston. When you think about, the history and a lot of those major suffragists, we have Lucy Stone, who was an awesome example of what it means to kind of stand in your truth and advocate for what you believe is right. She spent her life advocating as not only a suffragist, but an abolitionist. So it shows that Boston is very ingrained in the spirit of creating equality. So, like you said, we had a lot of great plans. We were a part of the Coalition for Suffrage 100. And here in Massachusetts, we were going to do a large, march throughout the streets. But of course, with COVID, that we couldn't have that happen. We want to make sure people are safe. So trying to think of ways that people can engage digitally. We're in the middle of a 19-day countdown to show 19 ways you can be civically engaged. So if you follow us and through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Boston Women, you'll see the countdown. It's really awesome. It highlights a lot of great landmarks in the city, a lot of suffragists, and ways you can get civically engaged. Like, for example, registering to vote, making sure that you mail in your voter application by mail if that's what you choose to do. Becoming a poll worker, because we know a lot of poll workers are usually older residents, and because of health concerns, they're sitting this one out. So there's opportunities to do that, or even be a poll translator if you are multilingual, in order to help create that access that the suffragists advocated for so long ago.
Yeah, I love how, you're sort of making these connections to this one fight that happened 100 years ago still is informing all of the work that continues today in terms of equity throughout the city. It's cool to see those things linked. Can you talk a little bit about how your office has reckoned with the fact that this centennial only allowed, a certain number of women into the voting space, and that a lot of people were still left out of the conversation after that amendment, and that work sort of continued beyond 1920?
Yes, that's something that we talk about all the time when we have events. I know, for example, with a lot of the work that we put into different programmings with partners, and for all the things, every time we elevate the work of the suffragists, we explain the intersectionality and the layers that came with that decision. Because as a lot of people know, when we had when suffragists had the 1913 march in Washington, D.C., women of color were asked not to, march with their white counterparts, because it may, cause some divide amongst women from other places in the country. So when we think about what the 19th Amendment means, we definitely celebrate that milestone, because for women, it was hard enough to get out of the home and, turn on its head the idea that a woman's place is in the home and not in the streets organizing or at the ballot box. So we look at their bravery, and we try to also look at the things that were missed. Because I think as a student of history, I always want to make sure I see what's happened so that way we can learn and build off of it. So for us, that's why it's important that we highlight the importance of being involved in the political process, being civically engaged, asking those questions, making sure you're informed, knowing the deadlines, and you know, being a part of it, because for so many, you know, whether you are a woman, whether you're a person of color, whether, you know, you're a new citizen to this country, there are so many hurdles that are still in play. So we want to make sure that people are informed so they can be a part of the political process.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you were telling me about was the Boston Women's Suffrage Trail as a way to sort of learn some of that history. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, the Boston Women's Suffrage Trail is actually a favorite of mine. I know as someone who's getting more acquainted with Boston, I always love to walk around and, you know, see the sights and see different landmarks and learn about where I am. And I really love the suffrage trail because there's so many things that happen in Boston. It highlights the mural at the Massachusetts State House that's dedicated to different suffragists. There are spaces that are outside as well, because I know with the pandemic, there are limitations. So I know it might be difficult to get inside to see some of these things, but the beauty of it, the website has information about each stop, and it does have a map. So if there is something that you want to see, there are pictures and there are links for you to interact with these spaces and still learn. But, you know, I think everyone, once in a while, we need a break. So, you know, put on your mask, go outside, take a little walk, take in some of the sights, and just take it in and enjoy it. Because I feel as though when you're walking in the streets and, you know, walking in the same steps as these suffragists, it's very inspiring.
And then you also talked about an event that you have coming up to commemorate Boston's first cargo electric assist tricycle, which is
a mouthful,
really,
right?
Yeah, exciting sounding contraption there, and sort of the way that dedication is also part of the legacy of the women's movement. Can you talk a little bit about that event?
Yeah, sure. So coming up on August 20th, we are having a virtual naming dedication for our I like to say e-trike, because, you know, it's a lot easier than the whole formal name. But the e-trike is a new vehicle added to the city fleet to promote their dedication to creating greener solutions on getting around. So this tricycle is powered by battery and battery. And so it's electric, so you're not dealing with the gas emissions. But there's a huge, I guess you could say, wooden bucket. Or bucket or basket, you could say, so we could transport things around the city. So it's a cleaner alternative for us to get around. And we're naming it after Kitty Knox. She was a trailblazing cyclist. As soon as I heard about her, I was so inspired. She grew up out here in the 1880s, and as a young woman, she challenged a lot of gender and racial norms in order to compete in cycling. At that time, cycling was seen more as a leisurely sport, and especially for women, you know, when you see the pictures of the long skirts and the high bicycles, you know, it's more for vanity's sake. And at that time, that was a time when women were just, you know, getting more mobile, getting out the house. So this was a very pivotal time. So when, you know, Kitty dared to compete and she would wear, you know, men's pants and ride a men's bicycle, quote unquote, it really put people on their head. But her trailblazing efforts really opened up the doors for cycling for a lot of folks. And I know to this day, a lot of cycling clubs still, you know, are in awe and honor her. So we wanted to, you know, get in on that. So we're naming it Knox. So we're really excited. So if you spot Knox, definitely take a picture with it, because, you know, it's something great to see. And I'm happy to see the city and, you know, the Department of Environment and New Urban Mechanics and Women's Advancement, we all came together to make sure that this event could be possible. So that'll be going on the 20th really soon. So we love to do that at the city.
What are some of the other resources and events that your office has coming up or that you host that people might want to participate in or get involved in aside from these commemorative events that are going on?
I would say when thinking about how to get involved during August and thinking about ways to, advance and empower women, especially through, civic engagement and voting, our countdown really hammers a lot of those things, talking about deadlines and how to get engaged as either a poll worker or as a more informed voter. Also, in the beginning, I did reference our salary negotiation workshops. They're offered online. They're wonderful. I feel as though they're super informative, and I know that we work with individuals and with employers to understand what wage gaps are in Boston, how we can advocate on both ends to close them.
Well, thanks so much. I'm so glad that we were able to have you with us today and to share some of these resources and events. It sounds like you have a lot of really cool stuff going on. And we will definitely share some links to the countdown and the info about the ways that you're celebrating the centennial in the chat and in the resources for the event. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to celebrating with you digitally.
Yes, distance, but but it doesn't stop us from learning and having fun together. So yes, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it. And everyone have a great time commemorating this milestone, because even though these women reached a great point, there's still so much more that we can do to make sure we have voting access for all.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Ayanna.
Mm-hmm.
A millennial sits with their laptop, recording a vlog.
Hi there, everyone. Just had another, oh, hey, moment. So thought I'd bring you the latest in response to #trending topic. Oh, hey, this has nothing to do with respect for my elders. I've got total respect. I'm just saying we did the work. We tore it down. My generation did what you guys couldn't do. And thanks for all the help and stuff. I get we stand on your shoulders, but enough is enough already. I learned my lessons. I fought my fight, and we won. It's done. So get off my back and go back to the past and put your feet up.
The lights flicker, then go out. We hear various electronics power down. Then, in the darkness,
honey? Babe! Hey!
Suddenly, everything powers back on, and Frannie, an 18-year-old, dressed in 1930s middle-class fashion and holding a sign which reads, "Democracy should begin at home," is in the millennials' room.
What the hell are you doing in my room?
I think you know why.
Guilting me isn't a good strategy. You get that, right?
This is about integrity.
Integrity? Who says that?
I am.
All you are is the past. You get we're not there anymore. Yeah?
The past should always be a part of who you are.
What? Yes.
Your generation has no notion of what it means to fight for something. You have been handed everything on a plate.
Don't talk to me like that.
You have no respect.
You're like what, 12?
And you're being a child.
Look, kid, and actually listen to me, right? Because this has nothing to do with respect for my elder shit. I've got total respect.
Vote for me.
What?
If not for yourself, vote for me.
How do you vote for a dead person?
Unless they've now extended enfranchisement to aborigines, you should get off your ass and go vote.
We fixed it.
The election.
No, God, you know nothing. We're all sorted. Everyone can vote. Everyone's equal. We did it. We're done. 2026 was awesome. No need to vote, old lady. Seriously, it's over. The struggle is so over. It's ancient history. Goodbye, bad vibes. Hello, new future.
You can't be serious.
For sure, check Wikipedia. It's all there.
That's not what I meant. You can't seriously think that all the progress means you can just stop.
Yeah, we can. With all the bullshit we had to go through just to get here, I'm tired. I need some rest, actually. I need some self-care.
Justice is like water.
Jesus.
You don't drink enough one day to be good for the rest of your life.
It.
I am speaking. We are 10 years into our supposed suffrage, and I am yet to cast my first vote. The rest of the country appears to have given up on me. I have been bullied and beaten, and all I'm trying to do is exercise my right. I will one day cast a ballot before I die. And on that day, I will cry. I will feel as if my tears will never, ever stop. And after I cast my first ballot, do you know what I will do? I will not go home afterwards to put my feet up. I will look over my shoulder to find someone else who still stands on the other side of justice. It is really easy to convince yourself that we've won when you only surround yourself with people who share your inequities. I don't doubt you feel the progress that has been made, and you should not question the pride I feel as I look at you. But you are foolish to take this headway for granted. So you vote for me, and never, ever forget that well, someday, it will someday be drained and run dry by your own ignorance. It is your responsibility to that right, which is your fight now.
The lights flicker again. The millennial is alone. They look around in disbelief, then pick up Franny's sign in reverence. End of play.
It's us again. Welcome back. And what was really exciting about that piece is this idea that, to me, was this idea that equity inclusion work is never done. There's always something to do, and that can be energizing and galvanizing rather than defeatist. And so that's really exciting to me. And thank you, Catherine and Dylan, for putting that into your piece.
Yeah, I love that piece, and really all of the pieces tonight have this theme about bringing generations and the lineage of those who've come before you into conversation with today. You know, I think the fact that we have a responsibility to the folks who came before us and sort of did all of this work to create the change that made such a difference in their own time, that we benefit from today, that we have that same responsibility to do that for the folks who are coming next. So I think that theme is what I'll be really thinking about tonight as we go out into the world and think about the importance of voting. So I can't believe we're already at the end of our program. I feel like I could have watched 5 more plays about voting. But thank you so much to everybody for joining us for the Great Demand. Before we wrap up, we wanted to let you know that you can find more information about all the guests that joined us and some action steps that you can use as you go about your voting life in the links that we've added in the chat.
And would also love for you to join us for Open Write to participate in more writing prompts and to get involved with our C1 playwriting community. The next Open Write takes place on Saturday, August 22nd at 11 a.m. My co-host this month is the one and only Idris Goodwin, author of Hype Man, among other plays, poems, and beats, and he'll be talking to us about writing for the digital space. And you can visit our website to RSVP.
That's going to be an awesome conversation. I can't wait. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a donation to Company One in order to support our future events. You can donate by visiting companyone.org/donate. You'll also find that link and our Venmo handle in the description for this video.
And don't forget, the last day to register for the Massachusetts statewide primary election is August 22nd, and the deadline to apply for a mailed ballot is August 26th. Early voting for the primary election is from August 22nd to August 28th, and the primary election day is September 1st.
I've already got my mail-in ballot. I'm ready.
I'm ready too.
And also mark your calendar for the Massachusetts general election. The last day to register is October 24th, and the deadline to apply for a mailed ballot is October 28th. The Massachusetts general election day is November 3rd. You can check your voter registration and get all the dates and info about upcoming elections at the Secretary of the Commonwealth's Election Division page. Or from our friends at Mass Voter Table. We'll drop links in the chat and in the description to this video as well, so you can get all the info you need to vote this year. If you're interested in working at the polls, we've heard a couple of our guests talk about poll workers tonight. You can apply online through the election worker portal at www.voteforboston.com/poll-access.
Thank you again for joining us tonight to commemorate the suffrage centennial and explore how you can take action in your community. Happy voting, everybody.